Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the mysterious world of Did Medieval Knights really woo ladies with poetry and song? A story filled with whispers of power, betrayal, and secrets the old world tried to bury. There are moments in history that make you wonder how far humans could go for pride, for greed, or for survival, and this one is among them. So before you settle in, take a deep breath, dim the lights, maybe let the soft hum of your fan fill the room. And if you truly enjoy calm but dark storytelling, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see who's joining us on these late-night journeys through forgotten history. Now let's drift back in time together. The moon, a sliver of bone in the velvet sky, cast long, wavering shadows across the ancient stones of Castle Blackwood. Inside, the great hall echoed with the clatter of plates and the boisterous laughter of men-at-arms, a stark contrast to the quiet chambers above where Lady Isolde sat, her embroidery forgotten in her lap. She was young, barely past 17, yet her eyes held a weariness that belied her years, a burden inherited with her title and the vast lands it represented. Lord Roderick, her father, a man whose reputation was as cold and unyielding as the northern winds, had recently passed, leaving her alone in a world designed for men. And so the suitors had begun to arrive, a parade of ambitious lords and landless knights, each vying for her hand and, more importantly, for her dominion. Tonight it was Sir Gareth of the Twin Rivers, a man known for his prowess in jousts and his rather crude sense of humor. He had presented her with a freshly killed boar, its tusks menacing even in death, a gift meant to impress, yet it only served to highlight the vast chasm between his world and hers. Isolde longed for something more, something whispered in the troubadour tales that sometimes found their way into her ladies' chambers, tales of knights who spoke in verse, whose hearts were stirred by beauty, not just by battle. But were these mere fictions, spun for the amusement of lonely women? Or did such men truly exist beyond the pages of illuminated manuscripts? She sighed, pushing a stray strand of dark hair from her face. Her father had always scoffed at such romantic notions, deeming them weaknesses that had no place in the harsh realities of feudal power. A lady's value, he'd often bellowed, his voice resonating through the stone corridors, is measured by her lineage and the strength of her alliances, not by pretty words or mournful tunes. Isolde had learned to nod, to smile demurely, to hide the yearning that stirred within her. She knew that her marriage would be a political alliance, a strategic move on the chessboard of medieval power. Love, if it came at all, would be a fortunate accident, a rare bloom in a rocky garden. Yet a small part of her still harbored a secret hope, a yearning for a connection beyond mere duty. She had heard of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen whose court had supposedly been a haven for poets and musicians, a place where chivalry was more than just a code of conduct on the battlefield. Could it be true, she wondered, that knights, these hardened warriors, also possessed a gentler, artistic side? Or was it all just elaborate theater, a performance to win favor and fortune? Down in the great hall, Sir Gareth was regaling the assembly with a rather graphic account of his recent hunt, his voice booming over the scraping of chairs. Isolde cringed. This was not the chivalry she dreamed of. This was the blunt, brutal reality of her world. Tomorrow, he would likely present her with a crude song, perhaps one he had commissioned from a traveling minstrel, a song filled with exaggerated praises of her beauty, devoid of any genuine feeling. She had seen it before, this pretense of romantic gesture, thinly veiling a desire for land and power. The very next morning, as the fog still clung to the battlements, a new arrival was announced. Sir Calin from the southern marches, a knight known not for his jousting prowess, but for his quiet demeanor and, so the whispers went, his skill with a lute. Isolde felt a flicker of something she dared not name, curiosity, perhaps, or a faint stirring of hope. He was ushered into the solar, where Isolde held court with her ladies. He was not as imposing as Sir Gareth, nor as boisterous. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet dignity, his eyes, a surprising shade of deep hazel, meeting hers with a respectful gaze. He did not immediately launch into boasts of his bravery or the size of his estates. Instead, after the initial pleasantries, he requested permission to play for her. Isolde, accustomed to the expected gifts of furs or jewels, was taken aback. "A lute." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. He then took his lute, its polished wood gleaming softly, and began to play. The melody that filled the solar was unlike anything she had ever heard within the castle walls, not the raucous tunes of the hall, nor the simple, often melancholic ballads of the maids. This was intricate, weaving a tapestry of sound that spoke of distant mountains and sun-drenched valleys, of quiet streams and the gentle whisper of the wind through ancient trees. As he played, he sang, his voice a rich baritone, weaving words that spoke not of conquest or crude humor, but of the fleeting beauty of a rose, the quiet strength of an oak, and the enduring power of a silent devotion. It was poetry, not of the simple rhyming couplets she was used to, but of deeper meaning, of metaphors that danced just beyond her grasp, yet resonated deeply within her soul. He sang of a lady, not as a prize to be won, but as a guiding star and inspiration, a source of inner strength. Isolde listened, mesmerized. Could it be? Could these tales of romantic nights, of poetry and song, actually hold a kernel of truth? Sir Calin did not speak of love directly, not in so many words, but his music and his poetry spoke volumes. He spoke of respect, of admiration, of a connection that went beyond the superficial. And in a world where women were often treated as chattel, as bargaining chips in a game of power, his subtle reverence was a balm to Isolde's weary spirit. Yet the harsh realities of her position soon resurfaced. Lord Eldred, a neighboring baron, a man known for his brutal efficiency and even more brutal temperament, had also made his intentions known. He was older, scarred, and his reputation preceded him like a dark cloud. His proposal, delivered by a grim-faced envoy, was less a request and more a demand, backed by the implicit threat of his formidable army. Her father's advisors, a council of elderly, pragmatic men, saw Lord Eldred as the most logical choice. His lands bordered Blackwood, and an alliance would consolidate significant power, making them formidable against any rival. They dismissed Sir Calin's artistic endeavors as frivolous, a waste of time and resources. Poetry will not defend our borders, Lady Isolde, the eldest advisor, Master Elric, had intoned, his voice dry as parchment. Only steel and strategy will ensure our survival. Isolde knew they spoke sense, a cold, hard sense that left no room for dreams or desires. Still, she found herself drawn to Sir Calin. He would often seek her out in the castle's small, neglected garden, a place where she found solace amidst the tangle of overgrown roses. There he would recite verses, sometimes his own, sometimes ancient lays, his voice a gentle murmur against the backdrop of rustling leaves. He never pressed her, never demanded anything. He simply offered his art, his quiet companionship, and a respect that felt utterly foreign in her constrained world. She started to look forward to these stolen moments, to the way his words painted vivid pictures in her mind, transporting her, if only for a brief time, beyond the grim reality of her impending marriage. One evening, as the first stars began to prick holes in the darkening sky, Sir Calin shared a particularly poignant ballad, a tale of a knight who, despite insurmountable odds, remained steadfast in his devotion to his lady, not through grand gestures of combat, but through quiet perseverance and unwavering loyalty. As he finished, a hush fell between them. Isolde felt a tear escape and trace a path down her cheek. Do such nights truly exist? She whispered, her voice barely audible. He looked at her, his hazel eyes deep and thoughtful. The world is full of different kinds of valor, my lady. Some fight with swords, others with words. Both require courage, but one seeks to build, while the other often seeks to destroy. His words struck her deeply. She knew that her father's world, the world of her advisors, was one of constant struggle, of destruction and acquisition. Sir Calin offered a different path, a path of creation, of beauty, of gentleness. But the shadow of Lord Eldred loomed large. His envoys grew more insistent, their messages increasingly thinly veiled threats. Rumors began to circulate that Eldred was amassing his forces, a clear sign of his impatience. The advisors urged Isolde to make her decision, to secure the alliance before it was too late. They presented her with a draconian law, freshly penned, that dictated if a noble house failed to secure a suitable alliance within a year of their lord's passing, their lands would be forfeit to the crown, or worse, distributed among neighboring lords. It was a thinly disguised tactic, designed specifically to pressure her into accepting Eldred's offer, for the crown, in its greed, would surely favor the stronger, more established lord. The injustice of it all burned within her. To be forced into a marriage, not for love, not even for true security, but for a twisted interpretation of feudal law born of avarice and fear. She knew that Eldred, once married to her, would rule Blackwood with an iron fist, stripping her of any remaining authority, perhaps even her life, should she displease him. Her very identity would be swallowed by his ambition. One fateful evening, during a feast meant to impress Lord Eldred's newest envoy, a plump, smirking man named Sir Boren, Sir Calin, emboldened by wine and perhaps a desperate hope, performed a new song. This one was different. It wasn't a gentle ballad of love, but a subtle, yet scathing, critique of tyranny and the abuse of power. He sang of kings who lost their souls chasing gold, of knights who forgot their honor in pursuit of land, and of ladies whose hearts were broken by cruel decrees. His words, though veiled in metaphor, were sharp, pointed darts aimed directly at the heart of the current political climate, and by extension, at Lord Eldred himself. A hush fell over the great hall. The usual boisterous laughter died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Sir Boren's face, usually ruddy with good cheer, began to purple with anger. Isolde's stomach churned. Calin had gone too far. He had risked everything, perhaps even his life, for a principle, for a belief in something better. When the song ended, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Suddenly Sir Boren rose, his voice shaking with fury. You dare, minstrel, to mock your betters, to cast aspersions on the rightful order. He gestured to the guards. Seize him. Let him feel the lash for his insolence. Isolde gasped, But before she could intervene, Sir Calin, with surprising swiftness, drew a small dagger from his boot. It was not a weapon of war, but a finely crafted tool, perhaps for carving wood or mending a lute string. He held it not aggressively, but defensively, his eyes fixed on Borin. "I speak only truth, Sir Borin," Calin stated, his voice calm yet firm, and truth, even sung softly, can be sharper than any sword. The guards hesitated, uncertain, for Caelin's quiet dignity, even in this moment of peril, held a strange power. Isolde, seeing his courage, found her own resolve. She stood, her voice, though trembling slightly, ringing clear through the hall. "He is my guest, Sir Borin, and he speaks no treason, only poetry. I will not have him harmed." Sir Borin, momentarily taken aback by her sudden defiance, sputtered, "Your guest? He insults a lord of the realm." But Isolde stood her ground. "He insults no one by speaking of injustice. Perhaps it is Lord Eldred who should examine his own conscience, rather than silencing those who question his methods." Her words, though bold, were dangerous. She had openly defied Eldred's envoy, an act that could lead to war. The hall erupted in a low murmur of shock and apprehension. That night, Isolde made a decision. She would not marry Lord Eldred. She would not be coerced by unjust laws or veiled threats. She sent a secret message to Sir Calin, instructing him to meet her at dawn, at the hidden gate by the old well. She knew the risks were immense. She could lose everything, her lands, her title, even her life. But a life without dignity, without agency, was no life at all. As the first sliver of dawn painted the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, Isolde met Calin. He looked worried but resolute. "My lady," he said, his voice low, "this path is perilous." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. "Perhaps, but it is my path, Calin, and I choose to walk it with courage, not fear." Together, they slipped out of the castle, leaving behind the oppressive weight of duty and expectation. Their plan was simple, yet fraught with danger: to seek refuge with a distant, neutral lord, one known for his sense of justice, and to plead their case before a higher authority, perhaps even the king himself. The journey was arduous. They traveled disguised, Calin as a humble merchant, Isolde as his silent, veiled wife. They encountered harsh weather, suspicious villagers, and even a band of ruthless brigands whom Calin, surprisingly, managed to deter with a clever display of quick thinking and a surprisingly fierce glint in his usually gentle eyes. Isolde saw a different side of him then, not just the poet, but a man capable of protecting what he cherished. During their travels, Calin continued to create, finding inspiration in the rugged landscapes, the trials they faced, and the quiet strength of Isolde herself. He composed new songs, not just of courtly love, but of resilience, of hope, and of the enduring spirit of those who dared to defy tyranny. These songs became their solace, their secret language, weaving a bond between them that was far deeper than any political alliance could have forged. News of their flight spread like wildfire. Lord Eldred, enraged by Isolde's defiance, declared her a rebel and began to openly assemble his army, threatening to lay siege to Blackwood. The king, a shrewd but often indifferent ruler, initially dismissed the affair as a squabble between minor lords. But as Eldred's aggression grew, and rumors of his brutal intentions reached the royal court, the king began to take notice. Eldred's ambition was becoming a threat to the stability of the entire realm. Finally, after weeks of perilous travel, Isolde and Kaelin reached the court of Duke Armand, a wise and just lord known for his balanced judgments. Isolde, no longer the demure, fearful maiden, stood before him, her voice clear and strong. She recounted Lord Eldred's threats, the unjust law designed to disinherit her, and her refusal to be forced into a marriage against her will. She spoke not of personal desire, but of the principles of justice and freedom, of the right of every noble to choose their own path, free from coercion. Kaelin, at her side, played a haunting melody on his lute, a wordless accompaniment that underscored the emotional weight of her plea. Duke Armand listened intently, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke. "Lady Isolde, your courage is commendable. But Lord Eldred is a powerful man, and his accusations against you are grave. You speak of injustice, but he speaks of a broken oath, of a lady abandoning her duties." Then Kaelin stepped forward. He did not challenge the Duke, nor did he boast. Instead, he presented a scroll of his poems and songs, carefully transcribed during their journey. "My Lord Duke," he began, his voice calm, "Lady Isolde's duty is to her people, to her lands, and to her own conscience, not to the whims of a greedy tyrant. These verses," he held up the scroll, "were born of our journey, of observing the very injustices my lady speaks of. They tell of the plight of the common folk under oppressive rule, of the despair when hope is extinguished, and of the quiet strength found in resistance." He then recited one of his most powerful poems, a vivid description of a land choked by fear, its people silenced, their spirits broken, all under the dominion of a ruler who valued power above all else. His words painted a stark, undeniable picture of the potential future of Blackwood under Eldred's rule. The court, initially skeptical, listened with growing unease. Kaelin's art was not merely entertainment. It was a potent weapon, capable of swaying hearts and minds. Duke Armand, a man who valued both order and justice, saw the truth in Kaelin's words, amplified by Isolde's unwavering conviction. He saw not just a runaway lady and a minstrel, but a potential threat to the delicate balance of power, and a blatant abuse of ancient laws being twisted for personal gain. He summoned the king's own legal scholars and demanded a thorough investigation into the so-called unjust law that threatened Isolde's inheritance. The investigation was long and arduous, full of legalistic wrangling and political maneuvering. Lord Eldred, confident in his power, sent his own legal team, who argued fiercely. But Isolde, supported by Duke Armand and the undeniable eloquence of Kaelin's artistry, stood firm. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. The law cited by Isolde's advisors was not an ancient custom, but a relatively recent decree, pushed through by corrupt officials under the influence of ambitious lords like Eldred, designed to facilitate the appropriation of lands from vulnerable houses. It was a clear abuse of power, a perversion of justice. The king, recognizing the dangerous precedent this set for other noble houses, and wary of Eldred's growing unchecked ambition, finally intervened. He declared the unjust law null and void, a fraudulent manipulation of tradition. He condemned Lord Eldred for his aggressive actions and threatened him with severe royal displeasure if he continued to press his claim on Blackwood. Lord Eldred, facing the wrath of the crown and the combined forces of Duke Armand and the now liberated Blackwood, was forced to retreat, his plans for expansion thwarted. His arrogant rule had almost brought him downfall, and he was now viewed with suspicion and disdain by his peers. Isolde returned to Blackwood, not as a desperate fugitive, but as a victorious lady, her position strengthened, her reputation for courage and integrity firmly established. She reformed her father's court, encouraging not only martial prowess but also the arts, scholarship, and fair governance. And Sir Calin, the poet knight, became her most trusted advisor, his wisdom and his art helping to shape a new, more enlightened era for Blackwood. Their story became a legend, whispered by minstrels and recounted in noble halls. It was a tale that showed that true chivalry was not just about wielding a sword, but about wielding words, about standing for justice, and about honoring the spirit of human connection beyond crude power plays. It proved that medieval knights, or at least some of them, did indeed woo ladies with poetry and song, not as a mere performance, but as an expression of true feeling, a gentle strength that could, in the end, overcome even the most brutal displays of power. The moral of this tale, whispered through the ages, is a simple yet profound one. Power, when wielded with arrogance and cruelty, often leads to its own downfall. But compassion, truth, and the quiet power of art, when combined with courage, can change the course of destiny, proving that sometimes the gentlest heart can possess the greatest strength, and a well-placed verse can indeed be mightier than the sword. And so, the moon continues its slow journey across the sky, watching over lands that still echo with the whispers of forgotten songs and the stories of those who dared to dream of a different kind of world. The echoes of their tale stretched beyond the castle walls, becoming more than just a local legend. It became a quiet rebellion, a whispered hope for those who felt stifled by the rigid chains of medieval society. Isolde, with Calin by her side, transformed Blackwood into a beacon of enlightened rule. No longer was justice a commodity for the highest bidder, nor were noblewomen mere pawns in political games. She established a court where merit was valued over lineage, and where the arts flourished alongside martial training. The common folk, often ground under the heel of oppressive lords, began to look towards Blackwood with a newfound respect. Isolde implemented policies that, though seemingly minor to the grander scheme of kingdoms, made a profound difference in the lives of her peasants. She eased the burden of taxes, ensured that the harvests were fairly distributed, and established a system where grievances could be heard without fear of brutal reprisal. These were radical notions, in a time when many lords viewed their subjects as little more than property. One day, a group of traveling minstrels arrived at Blackwood, their clothes dusty from long roads, their instruments well worn but cared for. They brought with them tales from distant lands, and amongst them, a particular ballad that spoke of a lady of the whispering stream who had defied a lord of iron teeth with the help of a bard of the hazel eyes. Isolde and Calin listened, a shared smile passing between them. Their story, subtly altered and adorned with poetic flourishes, had truly spread. It was a testament to the power of a narrative, a symbol of hope that transcended the physical boundaries of their lands. However, such changes, such defiance of tradition, rarely went unchallenged. Whispers of Blackwood's unorthodox rule reached the ears of more conservative lords, those who clung fiercely to the old ways of absolute power and unchallenged authority. They viewed Isolde's reforms as dangerous precedents, a crack in the very foundation of feudal order. And amongst these, Lord Eldred, though chastened by the king's intervention, still harbored a simmering resentment, a deep-seated desire for vengeance. He began to subtly sow seeds of discord, spreading rumors that Isolde was weak, too soft to rule, and that Calin, the poet knight, was a sorcerer, enchanting her with his music and words. He painted a picture of Blackwood as a place where ancient customs were disregarded and where the natural order of things was being dangerously upended. Such rumors, in a superstitious age, could be lethal. They could turn allies into enemies and loyal subjects into fearful rebels. Isolde knew she could not ignore these veiled threats. She had built Blackwood into something special, a place of peace and progress, but it was still an island in a sea of suspicion and fear. She consulted with Kaelin. He, ever the strategist beneath his gentle exterior, suggested a bold move. They would host a grand tournament, not just of martial skill, but also of artistry and intellectual debate. It would be an open invitation to all lords and ladies, a chance to see Blackwood for themselves, to witness its prosperity and its fair governance firsthand. The idea was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a foolish extravagance, an unnecessary risk. Others, particularly younger nobles who were themselves growing weary of endless warfare and rigid traditions, saw it as an intriguing invitation. Duke Armand, their steadfast ally, pledged his support, which lent the event considerable legitimacy. The tournament began under a crisp autumn sky. Knights jousted with skill and courage, but alongside the thunder of hooves, there were also halls dedicated to minstrel performances, poetry recitations, and philosophical discussions led by scholars. Ladies, traditionally relegated to observing, were invited to participate in debates on governance and social welfare, their voices heard and valued. It was a stark contrast to the typical medieval gathering, a vibrant tapestry of culture and intellect woven amidst the familiar spectacle of martial prowess. Lord Eldred, unable to openly refuse an invitation endorsed by Duke Armand and implicitly sanctioned by the king, attended with a contingent of his sternest knights and most skeptical advisors. He watched with a sneer, scoffing at the poets and scholars, dismissing the debates as trivial. He was convinced that this display of softness would only expose Blackwood's vulnerabilities. During one of the poetry contests, a young, unknown bard, inspired by Kaelin's example, performed a powerful ode to justice and compassionate leadership, weaving in subtle criticisms of tyranny and blind adherence to outdated laws. His words resonated with many in the audience, touching on themes that were increasingly, "Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the mysterious world of the shocking truth about arranged marriages in the Middle Ages, a story filled with whispers of power, betrayal, and secrets the old world tried to bury. There are moments in history that make you wonder how far humans could go for pride, for greed, or for survival, and this one is among them. So before you settle in, take a deep breath, dim the lights, maybe let the soft hum of your fan fill the room, and if you truly enjoy calm but dark storytelling, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see who's joining us on these late-night journeys through forgotten history. Now let's drift back in time together. The flickering oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows across the ancient tapestries that adorned the castle walls, their threads depicting valiant knights and mythical beasts, yet never truly capturing the complex, often brutal, realities of the lives lived within those very stones. Imagine, if you will, a world where love, as we understand it today, was a luxury, a whispered secret, sometimes a dangerous folly, almost never the foundation upon which a family's future, let alone a kingdom's stability, was built. This was the Middle Ages, a time of lords and ladies, serfs and scholars, and a system of unions forged not by affection, but by alliance. We're delving into the shocking truth about arranged marriages, a practice so deeply ingrained in the fabric of medieval society that it shaped destinies from the humblest peasant hut to the grandest royal court. But what truly constituted a marriage in those times? And what were the hidden costs, the unspoken tragedies, and the surprising benefits that lay beneath the surface of these preordained unions? Let's begin our journey in the small, yet strategically important kingdom of Eldoria, a land nestled between towering, mist-shrouded mountains and a treacherous, pirate-infested sea. King Thuron, a man whose stern gaze could silence a bustling hall and whose booming laugh could shake the rafters, sat upon his throne, his brow furrowed in deep contemplation. His only daughter, Princess Lyra, was fast approaching her 16th summer, a dangerous age for an unmarried royal in a realm constantly teetering on the brink of war with its expansionist neighbor, the Duchy of Valerius. Lyra was a spirited girl, with eyes the color of emeralds and a wit sharper than any knight's sword, but her personal desires were utterly insignificant in the grand scheme of royal politics. Her hand in marriage was a powerful chess piece, to be moved with precision and ruthlessness. The whispers in the court were growing louder, the murmurs of potential suitors from distant lands. There was Duke Valerius himself, a man twice Lyra's age, with a reputation for cruelty and an insatiable hunger for land. Then there was Prince Alaric from the Northern Kingdom, a young man known for his poetic sensibilities and his weak military, making him an unsuitable match in Thuron's pragmatic eyes. And finally, the unexpected proposal. Lord Calin, a formidable warrior from the treacherous western marches, a man whose loyalty to Eldoria was unquestioned, but whose lands were distant and whose temperament was as wild and untamed as the mountains he hailed from. King Thuron had already made his decision, long before Lyra was even aware of the negotiations. The alliance with Lord Calin, though unconventional, offered a strategic advantage against Valerius, and Calin's formidable army could secure Eldoria's western borders. The king believed he was acting in the best interests of his kingdom, a father sacrificing his daughter's happiness for the greater good of his people. But what of Lyra? How did she, and countless others like her, navigate this predetermined path? The news was delivered to Lyra by her lady-in-waiting, Ilara, a gentle soul who herself had been wed at 14 to a gruff, aging merchant to secure her family's dwindling fortunes. Ilara's eyes held a deep, unspoken sorrow that mirrored the sudden chill that gripped Lyra's heart. "Princess," Ilara began softly, her voice barely a whisper, "His Majesty has made arrangements for your future." Lyra, who had been practicing her lute, her fingers dancing lightly over the strings, felt them suddenly stiffen. She knew what this meant. She had seen it happen to other noblewomen, their laughter slowly fading, their spirits gradually dimming as they embraced their roles as political pawns. The engagement feast was a grand affair, held in the castle's great hall, a cacophony of music, laughter, and the clinking of tankards. Lord Calin, a tall, imposing figure with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of 1,000 battles, regarded Lyra with a gaze that was neither warm nor cold, but simply assessing. He was not unkind, not overtly cruel, but he was a stranger, and the thought of sharing her life, her bed, her very existence with him, sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. Yet she had no choice. To defy her father, the king, was unthinkable, a betrayal that could lead to dire consequences, not just for herself, but for her entire family, perhaps even her kingdom. This was the brutal reality of arranged marriages for the nobility. They were not merely unions of two individuals, but mergers of two houses, two lands, two armies. Children, sometimes as young as 7 or 8, could be betrothed, their future sealed before they even understood the meaning of the word marriage. Dowries, vast sums of money, land, or goods, would exchange hands, solidifying the economic and political bond. And should one party renege on the agreement, the consequences could be catastrophic, leading to feuds, wars, and utter ruin. But what of the peasants, the vast majority of medieval society? Surely their lives were simpler, freer from these political machinations. Not entirely. While peasants rarely married for grand political alliances, their unions were just as carefully arranged, though often for more pragmatic reasons: labor, land, and survival. A strong son-in-law could bring an extra pair of hands to the farm. A daughter-in-law could help with weaving and cooking. The lord of the manor often had the final say, granting permission for marriages, sometimes even selecting suitable partners to ensure a robust workforce and a steady flow of taxes and services. Love, again, was a secondary consideration, a pleasant bonus if it happened to blossom after the vows were exchanged. Back in Eldoria, Lyra's wedding day dawned gray and somber, mirroring the mood in her chambers. She was adorned in a heavy gown of silver and blue, her hair intricately braided with pearls, a circlet resting on her brow. She looked every inch a princess, but inside she felt like a caged bird, her wings clipped, her song silenced. She walked down the aisle, her hand in her father, towards a future she had no part in choosing. Lord Callan stood waiting, his expression unreadable. The ceremony was long, filled with ancient vows and solemn blessings, and by the time it was over, Lyra felt as though a part of her soul had been irrevocably altered. The early days of her marriage were a blur of formal dinners, stiff conversations, and the daunting task of learning to navigate her new role as Lady of the Western Marches. Callan was a man of few words, his days spent overseeing his garrisons, training his knights, and poring over maps. He treated Lyra with a quiet respect, but there was a palpable distance between them, a chasm born of their forced union. Lyra found solace in exploring the wild, untamed beauty of her new home, riding her horse through rugged valleys and along windswept cliffs, seeking a sense of freedom that was denied to her within the castle walls. It was during one of these rides that she stumbled upon something that would forever alter her perception of Callan, and indeed, of the entire system that had bound them together. She had ridden further than usual, her thoughts lost in the rhythmic thud of her horse's hooves, when she came across a small, secluded cottage nestled deep in a hidden grove. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, and the faint sound of a woman singing a lullaby drifted on the breeze. Curiosity piqued, Lyra dismounted and approached cautiously. Through a small, unadorned window, she saw a woman, her face etched with the lines of age and hardship, cradling a baby. And then she saw him. Lord Callan, sitting by the hearth, not with the stoic, distant demeanor she knew, but with a gentleness that softened the hard lines of his face as he watched the woman and child. Lyra, unseen, felt a jolt of shock. Who were these people? Was this a secret family? A betrayal? Her mind raced with questions, and a cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. She retreated silently, her heart pounding, her carefully constructed understanding of her husband crumbling around her. She rode back to the castle in a daze, the beautiful scenery now a blur. That night's sleep eluded her. She lay awake, the image of Kalen in the cottage haunting her thoughts. The next morning, she confronted him, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Kalen listened to her accusation silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "Lyra," he began, his voice low, "that woman is Alara, my sister, and the child is her son. Her husband, a good man, was killed fighting off bandits last year. She has nowhere else to go. I could not bring her here, to the castle, not with the fragile peace we have with Valerius. It would be seen as a weakness, a distraction. So I settled her in that cottage, where she and her son can live in peace, away from the dangers of court. I visit them when I can." Lyra stared at him, her anger slowly giving way to a profound sense of shame and then a dawning realization. Kalen, the gruff warrior, had a hidden depth of compassion, a sense of family loyalty that transcended the cold dictates of politics. He was not a monster, but a man burdened by duty just as she was. And in that moment, a fragile bridge began to form between them, built not on passionate love, but on shared understanding and a reluctant respect. This wasn't the romantic love she had dreamed of, but perhaps, in the harsh realities of the Middle Ages, it was something more enduring. The years that followed brought both challenges and a surprising sense of stability. The alliance with Kalen did indeed prove crucial. When Duke Valerius, emboldened by his perceived strength, finally launched a full-scale invasion of Eldoria, it was Kalen's strategic brilliance and the unwavering loyalty of his Western Marches warriors that held the line, buying King Thuron enough time to rally his forces. Lyra, no longer a naive princess, found herself immersed in the day-to-day management of Kalen's vast estates, learning about trade, agriculture, and the welfare of the common folk. She even began to advise Kalen, her keen intellect proving invaluable in matters of diplomacy and resource allocation. She discovered that Kalen, despite his stern exterior, valued her insights and treated her as a true partner. Their marriage, born of political necessity, had slowly, almost imperceptibly, transformed into a union of mutual respect and quiet companionship. They never spoke of love in the passionate, courtly sense, but there was a deep current of affection and understanding that flowed between them. They had built a life together, not just for themselves, but for their kingdom, and in time, they had children, strong, intelligent boys who inherited their father's resilience and their mother's sharp mind. Lyra found a quiet contentment, a sense of purpose that transcended her initial despair. She realized that while her personal choice had been taken from her, she had found agency within her circumstances, shaping her destiny in ways she never thought possible. But the Middle Ages were a time of constant flux, and power, like a shifting sand dune, could never truly remain still. King Thuron, now an old man, grew increasingly frail, his judgments clouded by age and a growing paranoia. He began to distrust his most loyal vassals, including Kalen, whose influence had grown considerably due to his military successes and his reputation for fairness. Thuron, once a wise ruler, started to listen to the whispers of ambitious, sycophantic courtiers who sought to undermine Kalen and elevate themselves. Among them was Lord Gareth, a younger noble with a silver tongue and a viper's heart, who subtly poisoned the king's mind against his son-in-law. Gareth, whose family had long coveted the rich lands of the Western Marches, began to weave a web of deceit, fabricating stories of Kalen's supposed disloyalty, of secret meetings with foreign powers, of plots to usurp the throne. He even hinted at Lyra's complicity, suggesting that she, too, was seduced by power and had abandoned her father's interests. The old king, susceptible to fear and flattery, began to believe these malicious lies. His once clear vision for his kingdom became obscured by suspicion, and the very alliance that had saved Eldoria from Valerius was now being slowly dismantled from within. One bleak winter morning, a royal decree was issued, summoning Kaelin to the capital under the guise of discussing new defensive strategies. Lyra, sensing the ominous tone of the message and knowing her father's declining mental state, pleaded with Kaelin not to go. "It's a trap, my lord," she urged, her emerald eyes filled with dread. "My father is not himself. Gareth has poisoned his ear. They mean you harm." But Kaelin, ever bound by his sense of duty and honor, refused to believe his king would truly betray him. "I am sworn to King Thuron," he declared, his voice firm. "I will answer his summons." He rode to the capital with a small retinue, leaving Lyra to manage the western marches, her heart heavy with foreboding. Days turned into weeks, and no word came from Kaelin. Lyra's anxiety grew unbearable. Then a lone, bloodied messenger arrived, collapsing at the castle gates, his whispered words confirming Lyra's worst fears. Kaelin had been arrested upon his arrival, accused of treason, and thrown into the deepest dungeons of the royal castle. The messenger spoke of cruel interrogations, of torture devices prepared for a swift, brutal confession. King Thuron, manipulated by Gareth, was determined to make an example of Kaelin, to reassert his absolute authority, even if it meant destroying the very foundations of his kingdom's security. This was the dark underbelly of medieval power, the absolute authority of the monarch, the ease with which alliances could be shattered, and the horrific injustice that could befall even the most loyal subjects. Torture, a common instrument of the state, was used not just to extract confessions, but to break spirits, to send a chilling message to anyone who dared to challenge the established order. The rule of law, as we understand it, was often a fragile concept, easily bent and twisted by those in power. Lyra, heartbroken and furious, knew she could not stand idly by. Her gentle nature had hardened over the years, forged by the responsibilities of leadership and the quiet strength she had found in her marriage. She gathered her most loyal knights, men who had fought alongside Kaelin and respected his integrity. She knew that any direct confrontation with her father's forces would be seen as an act of open rebellion, potentially plunging Eldoria into a devastating civil war. So she devised a plan, daring and dangerous, that relied on stealth, cunning, and the deep network of loyalists Kaelin had cultivated over the years. Under the cover of a moonless night, Lyra and her small band of knights rode towards the capital, their faces grim, their determination absolute. They bypassed the main roads, utilizing forgotten forest paths and ancient shepherd trails. Their goal, to infiltrate the royal castle, free Kaelin, and expose Gareth's treachery before it was too late. The castle was a formidable fortress, its walls thick, its guards numerous. But Lyra knew its secret passages, its hidden tunnels, tales she had heard as a child, dismissed as mere legends, but now vital to their survival. One such passage, known only to a few trusted individuals, led from the old market square directly into the castle's kitchens. Disguised as humble merchants seeking shelter from a sudden storm, Lyra's knights created a diversion, drawing the attention of the outer guards while Lyra and two of her most agile men slipped into the passage. The air was thick with the smell of old stone and damp earth, the silence oppressive. They navigated the narrow, twisting tunnel, their hearts pounding in their chests, until they emerged into the bustling, noisy world of the castle kitchens. Chaos erupted as they moved through the castle, their presence quickly discovered. Alarms blared, guards shouted, and the clash of steel echoed through the ancient halls. Lyra, wielding a dagger she rarely carried, found herself fighting alongside her knights, her royal upbringing replaced by a fierce, primal instinct to protect her family. They fought their way through a labyrinth of corridors, guided by the desperate screams emanating from the dungeons below. Finally, they reached the dungeon's entrance, a heavy iron-bound door. It was guarded by several of Gareth's most brutal men, their faces hardened by years of unquestioning loyalty to cruelty. A fierce battle ensued, the clang of swords and the grunts of exertion filling the confined space. Lyra, with a surge of adrenaline, disarmed one of the guards, her dagger flashing in the dim torchlight. Her knights, inspired by her courage, fought with renewed ferocity. They prevailed, though not without casualties. With the guards subdued, Lyra rushed to the cell where Calin was held. He was weak, his body bruised and battered, but his eyes, though clouded with pain, lit up with recognition and a flicker of hope as he saw his wife. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "you came." "Yes." "Always," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, as her knights quickly worked to unlock his shackles. Their escape from the castle was even more perilous than their entry. The entire fortress was now on high alert. They made their way to the stables, where Lyra had arranged for horses to be waiting, thanks to a network of loyal stable hands still devoted to Calin. As they burst out into the moonlit courtyard, they were met by a contingent of royal guards, led by Gareth himself, his face contorted with rage. "Traitors!" Gareth shrieked, drawing his own sword. "You will not escape." The ensuing skirmish was brutal and desperate. Calin, despite his injuries, fought with a ferocity born of injustice and a desire to protect his wife. Lyra, too, defended herself fiercely, her movements fluid and surprisingly effective. Just as the tide seemed to be turning against them, a sudden, unexpected figure emerged from the shadows. King Thuron, cloaked and disheveled, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. He had heard the commotion, the shouts of treason, and something in the desperation of Lyra's voice, the raw conviction in Caelin's fight, had pierced through the fog of his paranoia. "Stop." The king's voice, though frail, carried an undeniable authority that momentarily froze the fighting. He looked from Lyra, bruised but defiant, to Calin, battered but honorable, and then to Gareth, whose face betrayed a flicker of fear. In that moment, the truth, so carefully obscured by Gareth's lies, seemed to rush over the old king like a cold wave. The pieces clicked into place: Caelin's unwavering loyalty, Lyra's desperate pleas, Gareth's ambition. "Gareth," King Thuron croaked, his voice laced with dawning horror, "what have you done?" Gareth, seeing his scheme unravel, made a desperate lunge for the king, hopping to silence him, to seize control. But Calin, despite his wounds, reacted with lightning speed, interposing himself between the king and the treacherous noble. A quick, brutal struggle followed, ending with Gareth disarmed and apprehended by Lyra's remaining knights. The other royal guards, witnessing the king's realization and Gareth's attempted regicide, quickly dropped their weapons, their loyalty shifting back to the rightful monarch. In the aftermath, King Thuron, humbled and filled with remorse, apologized profusely to Calin and Lyra. He saw with painful clarity how his own fear and vanity had nearly destroyed his kingdom and cost him his most loyal subjects and his own daughter. Gareth was tried and condemned for treason, his lands forfeited, his name erased from the royal records. The king, recognizing his own failing health and seeking to ensure a stable future for Eldoria, made a momentous decision. He declared Callan and Lyra his rightful heirs, placing the future of the kingdom in their capable hands. This was the shocking truth of arranged marriages in the Middle Ages. They were not always tales of unending misery, nor were they always romantic tragedies. Often they were complex arrangements that could, against all odds, evolve into partnerships of deep respect, shared purpose, and even a profound, if unconventional, form of love. They were instruments of power, yes, capable of immense injustice and cruelty, but also capable of forging powerful alliances that brought stability and prosperity. Lyra, who had once despaired over her lack of choice, found that her strength lay not in defiance of the system, but in her ability to navigate it, to find her own agency within its confines. She and Callan, now king and queen, ruled Eldoria with a wisdom born of hardship and a compassion forged in shared adversity. They understood the human cost of power, the fragility of justice, and the importance of unwavering loyalty. Their rule ushered in an era of peace and prosperity, a testament to a marriage that began without love, but ultimately blossomed into something far more powerful, a partnership built on trust, respect, and an unshakable commitment to their people. And so, the story of Princess Lyra and Lord Callan, a tale woven into the very tapestries of Eldoria, serves as a poignant reminder that while the Middle Ages might seem distant and strange, the human heart, with its capacity for resilience, courage, and a unique kind of love, remains timeless. The shocking truth wasn't always about pain and suffering. Sometimes, it was about finding unexpected light in the deepest shadows, even when your fate was decided for you long before you ever had a say. It was a time when individual desires often bowed to the collective good, but within those constraints, extraordinary individuals found ways to shape their own legacies, leaving behind a moral for all of us. Even in the most predetermined of lives, true character and courage can forge a destiny far grander than any royal decree. Ah, excellent. Let us seamlessly drift back into the quiet narrative, picking up precisely where we left off, allowing the gentle current of history to carry us further into the nuances of medieval life and the unexpected destinies forged within its strictures. The flourishing kingdom of Eldoria, under the joint rule of King Callan and Queen Lyra, had indeed become a beacon of stability and a testament to their unique journey. Their reign was marked by pragmatic governance, where justice, though still stern by modern standards, was tempered with fairness, and the welfare of all subjects, from the highest noble to the lowliest peasant, was considered. They abolished some of the crueler, more arbitrary laws that had festered under King Thuron's later years, replacing them with edicts that sought to protect the vulnerable and ensure a more predictable, if still hierarchical, social order. For example, they established specific courts where peasants could appeal grievances against their lords, a radical concept at a time when a lord's word was often law within his own domain. This act alone garnered them immense loyalty from the common folk, who saw in their new monarchs a genuine concern for their plight. Their personal relationship, too, continued to deepen, evolving far beyond the initial cold arrangement. There was a quiet strength in their shared glances, a comfort in their comfortable silences, and an unwavering unity in their decisions. Lyra's sharp intellect, once stifled by courtly expectations, now shone brightly in matters of statecraft. She championed education, establishing small scriptoria in larger towns and encouraging literacy among the children of both nobles and prosperous merchants, believing that knowledge was a fortress against ignorance and superstition. Calin, the formidable warrior, found himself increasingly reliant on her counsel, acknowledging that her perspective often brought a clarity he, in his more direct approach, might have overlooked. They held daily meetings in a sunlit chamber overlooking the castle gardens, discussing everything from crop yields and trade routes to diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms. One of their most significant reforms touched upon the very subject that had shaped their lives: arranged marriages. While they understood the political and social necessity of such unions for the nobility, they sought to introduce a degree of humanity and choice where possible. They decreed that while betrothals could still be made in childhood, the young man and woman, upon reaching adulthood, would have the right to petition the crown if they found the union utterly unbearable. This did not guarantee annulment, but it opened a pathway for review, for listening, and in rare cases, for a re-evaluation of the match, particularly if one party was proven to be cruel or incapable. This was a revolutionary concept, pushing against centuries of tradition, and it met with resistance from some of the more conservative noble families who feared losing control over their children's destinies. However, Calin and Lyra, with their combined authority and the unwavering support of the common people, slowly but surely began to shift the cultural landscape. Their own children, Crown Prince Aemon and Princess Isolde, grew up in a household that, while still steeped in duty and expectation, offered a glimpse of a different kind of royal family. Aemon, robust and thoughtful, was being groomed for kingship, learning the arts of war and governance from his father. Isolde, with her mother's keen mind and adventurous spirit, was encouraged to study, to debate, and to think critically, rather than being solely prepared for a life of domesticity and subservience. When it came time for Aemon's own arranged marriage to a princess from a powerful coastal kingdom, Lyra ensured that he and his betrothed, Princess Rowena, had ample opportunity to correspond and even meet discreetly before the final vows were exchanged. This wasn't about passionate romance, but about fostering mutual respect and a working partnership from the outset, a far cry from Lyra's own experience. Yet even in this enlightened era, the shadows of the past could still loom large. The old duchy of Valerius, now ruled by Duke Alaric, the son of the cruel Duke Calin had once fought, remained a constant threat on Eldoria's eastern border. Alaric, though outwardly charming, harbored a deep-seated resentment against Eldoria, fueled by generations of territorial disputes and his father's past defeats. He saw Calin and Lyra's reforms as weaknesses, their emphasis on justice and welfare as a sign of a softening kingdom ripe for conquest. He began to gather allies, sowing discord among disgruntled minor lords on Eldoria's periphery, whispering promises of greater power and wealth if they would support his inevitable invasion. The intelligence network Calin had meticulously built over the years, a web of spies and informants stretching across the region, brought unsettling reports of Valerius's preparations. Granaries were being filled, smithies worked day and night, and foreign mercenaries were being recruited. It became clear that another war was not just a possibility, but an inevitability. Lyra, recalling the fear and uncertainty of the previous conflict, worked tirelessly with Calin to prepare Eldoria. They fortified border towns, stockpiled provisions, and drilled their armies, ensuring that every peasant capable of bearing arms was trained, for their survival depended on collective strength. The war, when it finally erupted, was brutal. Duke Alaric, leading a vast and well-equipped army, launched a swift, devastating attack on Eldoria's eastern provinces. Villages were razed, fields burned, and countless innocent lives were lost. The initial shockwave of Valerius's assault threatened to break Eldoria's morale. But Calon, drawing on his decades of military experience, rallied his forces, employing cunning defensive tactics and strategic retreats that bled the invading army, slowly but surely turning the tide. Lyra, meanwhile, organized the relief efforts for the displaced, ensuring food and shelter for those who had lost everything, preventing the spread of disease, and maintaining the vital supply lines that kept their army fed and equipped. One crucial battle, fought in the muddy plains of the River Serpent, proved to be the turning point. Calon, feigning a full retreat, lured Alaric's forces into a treacherous marshland, where Eldoria's hidden archers and cavalry, expertly positioned by Lyra's strategic planning, ambushed the unsuspecting enemy. The battle raged for hours, a bloody, desperate struggle amidst the reeds and mire. Crown Prince Aemon, fighting alongside his father, displayed immense bravery and tactical skill, proving himself a worthy successor. Duke Alaric, witnessing the decimation of his forces and the indomitable spirit of the Eldorian army, knew he was defeated. In a final, desperate act of pride and folly, he attempted to lead a charge directly towards Calon, seeking a personal duel to the death. But Calon, seeing the exhausted, broken state of Alaric's remaining men, did not meet him in single combat. Instead, he ordered his archers to disable Alaric's horse, bringing the Duke crashing to the ground. Alaric was captured, not killed, a deliberate act of mercy and a display of power by Calon, who believed in justice, not needless slaughter. The aftermath of the war was a time of rebuilding and healing. Duke Alaric was brought before a newly established royal court, presided over by King Calon and Queen Lyra. He expected summary execution, the traditional fate of a defeated enemy. But Calon, remembering his own close call with injustice, and guided by Lyra's counsel, offered Alaric a different path. Valerius would remain an independent duchy, but it would be bound by a treaty of mutual defense with Eldoria, ensuring lasting peace. Alaric himself would be stripped of some of his personal wealth and lands, but he would be allowed to retain his ducal title, albeit with significantly diminished military power, and crucially, his life. He would be required to send one of his own children to the Eldorian court as a ward, not a hostage, but as a future diplomat, to foster understanding and break the cycle of generations-long animosity. This act of magnanimity, unprecedented in its scope, shocked the entire region. It demonstrated a new kind of leadership, one that sought to integrate enemies rather than simply eliminate them. It was a clear moral lesson for the arrogant ruler, Alaric, showing him that true strength lay not in destruction, but in judiciousness and the capacity for forgiveness, even in the face of immense aggression. Alaric, humbled and perhaps, for the first time in his life, genuinely touched by such unexpected grace, accepted the terms. Eldoria entered a long period of peace and prosperity, its borders secured, its people thriving. The reforms initiated by Calon and Lyra continued to take root, slowly transforming medieval society, making it a place where talent and hard work, while still constrained by birth, had a greater chance to flourish. The arranged marriages, though still a cornerstone of noble life, were now approached with a greater emphasis on compatibility and respect, moving away from the purely transactional. Love, in its many forms, began to find a little more room to breathe, a quiet undercurrent in the grand river of fate. The story of Kaelin and Lyra became a legend, told around hearths in winter and sung by traveling minstrels in market squares. It was a tale that began with a shocking truth about the lack of choice, the brutal pragmatism of power, and the crushing weight of duty in the Middle Ages. But it evolved into a narrative of resilience, unexpected partnership, and the quiet triumph of character over circumstance. Their lives taught that even when your path is laid out for you by others, it is how you walk that path, the choices you make within its confines, and the spirit with which you face its challenges that ultimately define your legacy. True power, they showed, was not merely an absolute rule, but in just governance, in tempering strength with mercy, and in finding common ground, even with those you were forced to marry. Their moral was clear. The most enduring alliances are forged not just by decree, but by mutual respect and a shared vision for a better world, proving that even in the darkest of times, light can be found, and love, in its own unique way, can blossom where it is least expected. This was the quiet revolution of King Kaelin and Queen Lyra, a testament to the fact that even within the most rigid structures of medieval society, human spirit could bend, but not break, ultimately reshaping the world around it with courage, compassion, and an unexpected wisdom. Their story remains a whisper through the ages, reminding us that the truth of history is rarely simple, often nuanced, and always rich with lessons for those willing to listen.